Paul, I'm excited to have you on the show. It's not just because you're British, but because, we're both into leadership and some other things, it sounds like, based on our conversation before the show. But why don't you introduce yourself? You are doing a practical leadership academy. You've written books. How do you want people to think of you as we're starting this conversation?
Wow. David, it's an absolute pleasure to be here. Thank you for the kind invitation. Do you know, I was asked that fairly recently. Would you introduce yourself? And I used to say, well, I'm Paul Morton, the Senior Vice President of Important Things at Big Com. And then you realize, by goodness me, it doesn't matter. So then I changed it and I introduced myself as well. I'm Andrea's son. I'm Catherine's husband, and I'm John and Vivian's father. And that's the important stuff out of the way, right? And everything else that happens is ancillary to that. Everything else supports that. So that's the important stuff. And my mum was a teacher, which led me to have a love of learning and a love of leadership, because she was a head teacher actually, and running a really big school. Um, so I learned to love learning. I learned to love education. I got into business early on. So how would I like people to know me? Well, I run a practical leadership academy, which is for small, medium companies who have promoted lots of people accidentally into management and then said, here's your team, on you go, good luck. Crickets. That's all they hear. And there's so much untapped potential. And I was driven to do it because my daughter is going to get a job fairly soon. And I do not want her to be working for one of those accidental managers who don't know what they're doing. So basically, I put a course together based on my 20 years of experience and then wrote a book about it. Well, the number of mistakes that I made, I've left a trail of victims of my leadership and management inexperience and catastrophe through history. And I'm sure we'll touch on some of them. So there you go. That's a rough
So,
guide.
so you're talking about your daughter going to the workplace soon, and she may have one of these managers that was promoted without training,
Yeah.
without mentoring. And so, have you taught her how to manage her manager?
Um, in the course of her schooling, I mean, she's in high school here, which is she's still young. She's still young. So in the course of her schooling, it's a case of, well, how do you handle your teachers? How do you handle those annoying people around you?
Yeah.
And yeah, it's there's so much of, I think, leadership that comes into parenting, that comes into leadership, that comes from life, that also, because my background is in sales, is a microcosm of the revenue cycle. So if you understand how people buy and sell and are simply starting by looking in a mirror, because first know thyself, right? That I think is where my advice to her comes. It's, if you want to understand somebody who's facing you, start with yourself. Don't always assume that they're the pain in the backside. You might be the one that's wrong. And then
Yeah.
once you've worked it out, give them a slap.
Yeah. I have a member of my family now. I have a lot of kids, and I have had to explain to her that, you just got to understand you have a nice boss, but she's not a good manager. So you have to manage your manager, and you have to
Totally.
do it really respectfully. You don't do it with manipulation or with, trying to trick them in any way, but you're just going to help them along and go in and do your best. And then that'll help you advance and it'll help you enjoy it. But you can't count on this manager to act like a manager.
Yeah,
They
yeah,
don't know how.
yeah. You need to lead. I mean, it's just this kind of the buying thing, right? The
Yeah,
best
yeah,
salespeople don't sell, they help people buy. The
yeah,
best workers don't work for someone, they help a manager do their job. So if you want
yeah,
to get promoted, you help a manager look good. Not artificially, but you help them to do their job, do the dirty stuff that they don't like to do the stuff that they don't know how to do. You
yeah,
know, that's part of the gig.
yeah, yeah. Interesting, interesting. And I wanted to go back. We were talking a little bit before we got on about how we both visit a gym. And I don't know about you, I should visit more often, but you're probably
You're
more on track. You sound more disciplined. But the one of the comments you made was that your son who's 10, you're starting to get him to do some exercises. And I was about to say, but I thought, let's just bring this into the realm onto the podcast here. When I was a junior in high school, so this was 1973, okay, way before most of our audience was born. And but my coach for water polo was a guy who was a football coach who was new to the school, couldn't get a job as a football coach, So he said, yeah, I'll do water polo, whatever. I don't know anything about it, which he didn't. Dennis Unterman, he was the strongest man in California in
Oh, wow.
1965. He was like 5'9", and he was just massive.
Tree. Built like
And
a tree.
he was a kid in an adult's body. Wonderful human being, just wonderful human being. And he lucked in that we had a great team. And so, but he was also really good at working with us. But I remember he said, I met his son during the season, tall, lanky kid. And I said, hey, coach, why don't you have your son working out weights? And he goes, no, not till he's 14. Doesn't have the bone structure. Now, I don't know whether that's scientifically correct, but it was very interesting. His son, who was once again this wonderful guy, I saw him 2 years later. He was built like a brick blank house. And he became the quarterback for the University of Hawaii football team. Uh, it was just a great guy. He had this Captain America body that he had built up, waiting until that time. You know, when you think of exercise and we think of leaders, and you bring up a lot, which I like, that leadership is like parenting.
Oh, yeah.
I like to talk about leaders, you know, it's adult daycare that you
Yeah.
have, you know,
Yeah.
to a certain extent.
Hmm.
So when you talk about one of the things with leadership, which I know you endorse, is that we have to be in good health to be a good leader.
You start there.
Yeah, yeah. So talk about what do you advise leaders as far as their health? Because you and I are blessed with some fairly lean bodies. We're in reasonably good shape. I say that choking as I say it because I'm not aerobically in the best shape. But what do you advise leaders who it's pretty easy to take somebody like us and say, okay, start running or go to the gym or do whatever. What about the leader who's let their body go
Mm.
and they're struggling with some weight, they're struggling with some health issues? This is totally off topic, but I mean, we're
No,
talking
no, it's the
leadership.
thing.
So
It happens. It comes up. I mean,
yeah,
I do like the one-to-one occasionally, very occasionally I do one-to-one coaching and stuff like that.
yeah,
And the
yeah,
place I always start is sleep.
yeah.
Are you getting enough sleep? Do you watch? Do you have a phone? Yes. Do you use it in your bed? Yes. Yeah, stop doing that. Don't have if you got a TV in your bedroom? Yes. Unplug the darn thing and take it downstairs. Don't do that.
Mhm.
Don't watch TV. Go to bed to sleep and to cuddle your wife. But that's it. Don't do any work in your bedroom if you can avoid it. If you're fortunate enough, and typically people of our ilk and manager types, they have a bit of space in their house these days. Although I did have many people working in the end of their beds for far too long during that nonsense. Um, but get some sleep. Start with your sleep. Then start with your eating. Right? You know you're a bit fat. Doesn't matter about the gym. Eat less. Right? Eat half what you're doing and exercise twice what you're doing. See if you walk to the end of the road and back. Walk to the end of the road and back twice. That's it.
Yeah.
Tiny habits. Start with the tiny habits. There's a guy called BJ Fogg. I think he's a social scientist, evolutionary biologist, that sort of thing. And he talks about tiny habits, trying to do the minimum effective dose. What's the least you can do that just starts moving the dial? So eat half of what you're doing, exercise twice of what you're doing. These are simple numbers. So you get your plate of food, draw a line of it. There you go, 2 meals. Save you a ton of money. Who doesn't
Oh
need to
yeah,
do that these days, right?
yeah.
Um, and that's it. So I would start with sleep, look at your food, look at your exercise, and work from there. And the reason, and there's always got to be a reason for this, because if you don't have the reason, people aren't going to do it. And it's if you don't look after yourself, you can't look after anyone else. Your job, and this is the fundamentals of it, your job is to make other people successful. And you cannot do that unless you yourself you're taking care of that first. You got to take care of your kids, you got to take care of your business, your team, whatever. Take care of yourself first. Going to the gym is more important. Personally, I say go to church, go to the gym, right? These are the things you got to look after your spiritual health, your physical health, your mental health. Then you can think about looking after other people's spiritual, mental, physical health. And only then do we get into, okay, ladies and gentlemen, this is how you hold a one-to-one. Because none of that matters if you're a bag of nerves and stressed and exhausted and going around that, you've got to
No,
fix
no,
that.
totally. I mean, and there's so many things that you touched on that strike me. So I think you mentioned before we got on that you guys make all your own food, something like
Yeah,
that.
yeah,
So
yeah.
it's
My
not
wife's
only
an
cutting
amazing
back
cook.
on the
Yeah,
amount, but it is what you eat. So
yeah.
we got into watching the Forks Over Knives movies years ago that are, vegetarian
Mm,
advocating documentaries. And we actually went vegetarian for like 2.5 years. Now we do have some meat, but I eat half the amount of meat I used to.
mm,
So, and only organic. And so,
yeah.
but there's different types of diets, but doing it yourself and looking at the quality of food. So your wife, you say, is an amazing cook and what she does. Is that what I heard?
Yeah, she's a superb cook. I really I enjoy my food as well. I mean, it's just also why I go to the gym. I like my food. So if I didn't go to the gym, I'd be 5 times the size I am now. I used to be a big guy. I was a good, I don't know, well, I can't do this in pounds, but yeah, let's try. I was a good 50 pounds heavier.
Yeah.
That was a thing. I was like, and there's an extra me right here. That took a long, long, long time to fix. A long
Did you
time.
ever listen to any of Zig Ziglar stuff?
Yes, I love Zig. It was just
Yeah,
fun.
Zig. So in the let's see, 1989 to 93, I was in sales, and he had a tape set, cassette tapes in those days, 6 cassette tapes, and it was I cannot remember Steps to the Top or something like that. And I remember he told, and I had other ones, but I remember he told the story. He was 100 pounds overweight,
Mm,
and he woke up one morning and said, "I'm not doing this anymore." And I don't remember what he said about diet. I'm sure he adjusted some things in diet, but he started running for the first time. And so he did two things that were very interesting that applies to your tiny habits. First of all, he said, "Okay, um, I'm going to run every day," and he would run 1 block, and then
mm,
he'd run back, and the next morning he'd run 2 blocks, and the next morning he ran 3 blocks. Now I don't know where he ended up, but and he had a goal. His goal was to lose 1/4 pound a day.
wow.
Yeah,
Mm,
and he followed that regimen, and in a year he lost 100 pounds,
there you
approximately
go.
a year,
Yeah,
and never looked back. And it was very very interesting his approach, and it ties into your tiny habits, which I think is awesome.
yeah.
That's great.
Wait, the other side of that, I think, is you have to track things. You
Yeah.
have to track things. You have to have a method of accountability. We are, humans are fanciful, whimsical creatures. We think we are rational and organized and structured and process driven. And some people have more of a predilection towards that. My wife is wonderful. She's a superb project manager, programs everything, really organized. I'm more of the strategist, kind of the ideas guy, and need other people to help me get stuff done. But we think we remember things. We think we know what's actually going on, and we really don't. We make decisions and then say that was because of a particularly sensible reason, and no, 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 it wasn't. We are not a rational species. We are a rationalizing species. So for Zig to do his 1/4 pound a day, I bet you he tracked it. He just ticked a box. He wrote it down. If you do
Yeah.
that, that's how you set the system in place that leads you towards and beyond whatever goal you could possibly imagine.
So you got to watch out. I'm the king of rabbit trails. But so you talk about we are a rationalizing species.
Yeah.
That links to a lot of stuff I've had to learn, unfortunately, about trauma and how wounded people are. And
Mm.
I'm wondering if you have thoughts on that, because as leaders, we have to deal with, we have to
Yeah.
serve, because you're talking about being a servant leader,
This
which I
is we're in
fully endorse,
service,
agree.
fully service.
But we have to, and you also talked about being very aware of the other person after we're aware of ourselves.
Mm.
So more and more, we are working with people who are really wounded,
Mm.
and they do rationalize. And some of them have a lot of trouble just saying, "Oh, I'm sorry, I did that wrong. Yeah, now I understand. I'll do better." Instead, they're like, "Well, the reason I did this is blah, 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 blah." But whoa, 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 wait a minute. You don't have to justify yourself. What I want you to do is own it.
Mm.
And then we just move on. So, what are your thoughts on that as a leader, trying to be a servant leader? and we're really kind of working with the walking wounded,
Mm.
including ourselves, by the way. You talked
Yeah.
about knowing ourselves. I got my own wounds. I grew up with two loving parents, and I didn't realize until a few years ago, at 67 years old, a few years ago, more fully, they really hurt me in a lot of ways. I don't hold it against them. They
Mm.
did their best, but in trying to do their best, they made some major mistakes.
Yeah, yeah.
And my life would have been very different if they had been able to be healthy. So, any thoughts on that?
Well, I
Just a
think
small little topic.
that's true. Yeah. Okay. Right. Where do we start? Well, I think you start with love, right? You start with love, and I think we don't talk about love enough in the workplace. Mostly because if you do, you get a phone call from HR, and you say, "What are you doing? Can't do that. Can't
Yeah.
love." You say, well, actually, there are. C.S. Lewis talks about four different sorts of love, and you have eros, which is romantic love, which is the one you probably don't want in your workplace unless you're married to one of them. You have
Agreed.
philia, which is the friendship. You have storge, which is the brotherly. And then you have agape, which is this divine, the love of the creator for his creation and the love that we have to show for the people in our care. And it's the good will, the willful desire for other people's success, this magnanimity that we have to show and put the other person at the center of our universe, which once we have healed ourselves, because if we do not, we bleed all over other people. Okay?
Mm.
If
Yeah.
you've got a big cut in your arm, fix it before you get out in public because you're going to make a mess everywhere, right? Don't do that. Heal yourself before you can go out and deal with the people around you. Look after yourself, fit yourself up, get fit for whatever it is you're doing. And then once you've decided you're going to put these other people at the center of your universe and dealing with them and their situation, I think it's recognizing that so many people have never had, you call it the loving parents, it's it is the parental figure. And I recognize many occasions that I was a father figure for other people. And when I started leading people, I wasn't particularly old, but I recognized that I was being seen as this, even by people who are older than me, because you're put in a position of delegated authority. And humans are, again, irrational when it comes to authority. Somebody's in power because of whatever reason. You put a white coat on, oh, you must know what you're doing. Here, look at my leg. What? We do this. It's just in our little heads because of hierarchies and family structures and whatever. That's the clique. That's how kings work and popes and priests and hierarchies. You're in this position. And because you're there, people look to you and they open up to you and they expect things of you. And because they've never genuinely, many people have never really had a good relationship with their own families or had someone to hold them accountable, they don't know that by taking ownership, exactly as you said, of their mistakes, it's good for you. That recognizing this is the wisdom that you're seeking. You seek
Yeah.
wisdom, you seek knowledge, you seek experience, and you need reflection. And again, my wise little son, when I was talking about the definition of wisdom, I said it is exactly experience, sorry, it's knowledge with experience applied and reflection on how it worked. And that's wisdom. And he said, no, it's not. I said, okay, Mr. 10-year-old philosopher, what do you think it is? And he said, well, you need to share it. If you don't share it, you are sitting in a mountaintop meditating, and that's very nice for you. Good for you. You're wise, but nobody else gets any benefit out of it. So you then sharing this knowledge, experience, wisdom, and reflection with people who necessarily, again, need someone to hold them accountable. But this is the technique. There is skill in this. And your parents, bless them, like all parents, me included, make it up as you go along because there's books coming out the nose and none of them are applicable because every kid's are different. Every kid's different. Every situation is different. Every business situation is different. But there are some rules of the road. There are tools and techniques and there's language and there's patterns you can use that don't project on people, that don't ask the wrong sorts of questions at the wrong times. It's like, don't ask people why. Don't ask them why. Why did you do that? What do you mean, why? Ask them what happened, or even better, help me understand what happened,
Yeah.
because that's putting it on me. You've just reframed the question. You've taken all the steam and the fire out of the situation, and you've turned it into a simple interrogatory. It's not an accusation. I'm not saying, David, why did you do that? I'm saying, ideally, I observed, David, that when you were talking to Claire, you raised your voice quite loudly. Now, the impact of that was that Claire doesn't really want to work with you anymore. Can you help me understand what's going on? That's
Yeah.
it. That's a technique. That's a parenting technique. It's a leadership technique. It's you pick up these things as you go, or you don't. And typically people don't.
Yeah. And so once again, I've got my mind's flowing. But my brother said I'm like a dinosaur, big body, small brain. So I probably won't remember everything. The you brought up the love piece, okay?
Yeah.
And have you heard? I first heard it from Danny Silk, but I'm sure it's out there from other people. There are two major emotions.
Hmm.
There's love, and then there's an opposite one. Have you heard that? What the opposite is?
I would say it's fear.
Exactly. And you're the first person that's answered that correctly. And so, what I want to emphasize to the audience is that what you said was when you bring love into your leadership role, it is not the well, eros. Is that what you said?
Yeah. Not
Uh,
romantic. It's
not
not romantic.
romantic. Not romantic. That's totally inappropriate. Okay. Unless, of course, your spouse works with you. But even that, it's not the workplace. It's not the place for it. But love then brings all the other fruits. Okay.
Hmm.
Love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, gentleness, faithfulness, self-control, etc.
Corinthians 16, I
Fear,
think it is. Mhm.
yeah, yeah, you're right. 4:16, yeah, 4:6, four,
Four,
six, and
six, yeah.
seven.
I was
Yeah,
close. I was close.
yeah, yeah. It's all right. You had the numbers, and I can't remember most of them most of the time anyway. But the other thing is, think about fear. So we're dealing with people who are
Yeah.
wounded. You don't necessarily you'll see fear like fear when they won't own something, like I brought up earlier. They may have been in a verbally emotional abusive situation or physically or sexually abusive. They may have been in some type of abusive situation where when they admitted something or even if they didn't, they got verbally abused or emotionally abused, and so it just doesn't feel safe because their self-esteem is so low to admit something. So the fear leads to anger, depression, anxiety, and some other behaviors that are very unhealthy. And we just need to be aware of this. We don't need to diagnose things,
Yeah.
but we need to be think of, okay, well, this person's behaving this way. That's not a healthy behavior. I don't necessarily know why, but this may be part of this. It looks like they've got a wound that's causing them to behave X. And I love your approach. I teach the same thing. And it's hard for some
Yeah.
people
Yeah.
to do
It's
that
not.
question
Uh-huh.
because particularly if you've ever done any of the disc behavioral stuff. Okay, I'm like 100% on the D.
Mm.
So hard charging, jump to conclusions,
Yeah.
solve any
DI.
problem.
Yeah.
You're the same way, yeah. So yeah,
Yeah. Totally.
and so it's just like it's faster and easier for me to just tell you what to do than it is for me to say, "Oh man, I noticed this." Like you said, what was going on there? That didn't seem to work very well.
Mm.
But I've learned. It took me into my 60s to learn this to behave that way. So hopefully, you and I, and you're much younger than I am, can help people learn this when they're younger. Think what our nations would be like, Paul. Think of Great Britain and America if we taught these things in elementary school, reinforced them in middle school and high school, and then really help people master them at the college level. How to,
That's it.
I mean, we'd be different countries.
It is. I mean, you see, we teach it. We teach it. I mean, I look after the kids groups in my church. We have Sparks, Blaze, and Inferno, and that's the three different groups of kids. And my son is in Blaze, which is the middle one, and my daughter's in Inferno, which is the bigger one. And we teach these things there because this is where it comes from. It is, I mean, who is the ultimate servant leader, right?
Yeah.
Who is the ultimate servant leader? Who's the ultimate servant leader and tells really good stories? I mean, it's Jesus. I mean, that's it. So
Yeah,
we teach
let me
these things
interrupt
in
you just for
church.
one moment, just for one moment, because I'm totally in agreement. But if we have some people who don't share our faith, I want to emphasize to you, you don't have to accept Jesus as Lord to realize that he has been the most influential leader in history.
Yeah,
Okay, there's he has affected billions of lives more than anybody else. So at least consider his lessons. You don't have, maybe you're not ready to consider the spiritual side.
look
There's so
at it
much
as a
practical
yeah.
stuff there.
Yeah, that's a, I mean, if you look at it from the whatever perspective, like a humanist or a scientific perspective, whatever you want to take it from, the life lessons that come through that you know intrinsically are there because they're just part of your language, these things are so powerful. They're so meaningful. They're so transformational. I mean, yes, ideally, let's all go to church tomorrow. Woohoo! Fine, great, come, I'll give you my address. But the point I think is that we accept that these are expressions of, you can call them universal truths. It's that other people, when you put other people at the center of your universe, you move yourself out and you become better. You just become a better human being. And as part of it was actually one of my goals. I worked out that my kid was going to enter the world of work in a number of years, and I worked out what was the likelihood of me being able to touch 1 in 10 of the potential man. This is a bad day with maths, right? The potential for me being able to touch 1 in 10 of the leaders that she would actually encounter. So I worked out I had to be able to train something like 97,000 people in the next 10 years. Okay. Now, I'm a way away from that, but I'm doing my best. So, because that would cascade, right? So if I touch one leader, they then will have a team of 8. And then over the course of the next 8 years, these people would be promoted up the ladder, and each in turn would follow the idea that servant leadership's the way forward, that it's not all about you, it's all about them, that
Yeah.
you have to look after yourself first, that.
Love it. Love it. So you are very big, as I am, on one-on-one meetings.
Yeah.
And you mentioned that momentarily earlier. Let's dive into that because when I think of leadership and you're thinking of servant, you're
Hmm.
thinking of loving them appropriately, then a lot of this comes down to not only your behaviors as a role model, but it also comes down to your availability
Hmm.
and your consistency. Talk to me about that.
And the practice within the consistency, totally. Um, and as it happens, and I don't even think this is planned, as it happens on my website, you've got a fabulous takeaway, which is the 5 steps to transforming your one-to-ones. And it's a brilliant little gift, and it's my gift to your listeners. The core of management practice boils down to that moment you have with your team, individually, one at a time, picking them off one day, one after the other. And if you don't do that and you don't do it well, you're missing, I think, the only real lever for growth that you have. If you're a leader of an organization, you've got very, very few things you can do to drive your business forward. How do you transform strategy into action? How do you get people to do what you want, right? You tell them, and then you tell them again, and you beat them over their head with a stick until they keep behaving. The punishment will continue until morale improves. Well, so the one-to-one moment, I think, is vastly overlooked and vastly underdealt with. So I've got a way of doing it, and I'll share. And it's very, very simple. It's that you make it a recurring diary entry. Put it in your calendar. Every week, 30 minutes, job done. However, in your calendar, at some point before this, you also need another 15 minutes. So half an hour. So half of that time, 15 minutes, should be preparation. And you must always prepare. And you must do your darndest never to move this because it's disrespectful. It shows what you think and how important the other person is when you move that one-to-one around. Think about how you feel when your boss does it to you. Keep it in the diary. Keep it consistent and follow a set, recurring, repeating agenda every single time. And because you've got this as a set, recurring, repeating agenda every single time, when something hairy and nasty happens, it fits in and you don't have to think about it, but you deal with it in the right order and the right way. And then the last magic trick is you track it. So we all use Google Docs or shared documents or whatever it is these days, Notion or whatever. Find some magical way of tracking every single one of these meetings in a rolling shared document. And in there, you just chuck in your notes for the moment. You say, I must talk to David about his paternity leave coming up because of X, Y, and Z. And then you follow that sequence. And the sequence I recommend, it's CUFCP, okay? CUFCP, which is check-in. Hey, David, how's it going? How's life? What's going on? How are the kittens? Did you get new hamsters? You mentioned you were looking for hamsters. Did you? Whatever it is. C is for check-in. The U is for an update. Can you give me an update on that project that you're talking about? Where are you on? Is everything, can I need to get you a connection with somebody? CUF for feedback. Do you know what I observed? Now, feedback's a good word, but people don't like the word. I've got some feedback for you. Oh no, what did I do wrong? I've got an observation for you. And you can't argue with an observation because it's my observation. So I observed something. This is the impact of what I observed. Help me understand it. The best time is in the moment, of course, but if it can wait, put it into your one-to-one. CUF for feedback. C is for coaching. And all you need to do is to help people move forward is ask them when they come to you with a problem. Oh, that's an interesting problem, David. What do you think our options are? That's it. Yes, you can become a coach. Go and do a coaching qualification. Cost you $20,000 and take you 5 years. Great, good for you. Some of them are wonderful. If you just learn to ask, what are our options? You kind of become a good coach. What are our options? And let them come up with the problems and the solutions and let them own the answer and then let them help you help them pick out the thing that they should be doing first. Which one do you think we should do? This one. Why? How are you going to start? Like this. Okay, great. And then the P right at the end is the plan. What's next? Well, I said I would connect you with this. You said you would do that. And I've tracked it. It's in the document. And the next time round, we look back at what we wrote down and we just drive our business forward day after day after day after week. And you make progress and it's structured and it's simple and I'm held accountable. And it might be awkward, but I love being held accountable, even though I don't think I do, because actually then I'm successful and success is good and it makes me happy. It's such a powerful moment.
Okay. So,
that's a long answer to a short question.
yeah, and I'm going to make it longer. So first of all, the prep side, let's do this. Let's put a visual to it, or at least a verbal visual. Okay. So think about it. You're going in to meet with your manager and you sit down with your man and you have a regular meeting. Let's say it's regular. By the way, in this particular situation, it wouldn't be regular probably, but you sit down with your manager and your manager says, hey, I just want to check in, see how it's going. And that's all they got.
Yeah.
How are you going to feel? Does that
I
person have your back? Does that person value you?
unloved, unvalued, unloved,
Yeah.
not cared about.
Yeah.
Nothing I do is important. You don't even remember my name, far less my
Yeah.
hamster.
Yeah. 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 They're just checking a box. They're just checking. Okay. Yeah. I met with them. Yeah, we're good. So, and then if you think about it, I don't know how it is in the UK, but my best dentist, my best doctor has notes on me. And before they meet with me, they glance real quick at the notes. Oh yeah, David's got XYZ going on. And so they'll come in and say, hey, by the way, you mentioned last time you were in here, your daughter was doing X. How's she doing now? And they pick it right up. And you can say it's manipulative or it's salesy. I actually think it's sincere. They meet with hundreds of people. It's not reasonable for me to require them to know everything about me. But I switched dentists 3 times when I moved in this area 6 years ago, um, to get to the one I'm at now because I feel the guy cares about me. In the prior place I lived, I went to the same dentist for like 20, 30 years. And yeah, I even shifted to his partner that he brought on, Dr. Anand, the dentist, and Rosenthal is the original guy. And Anand was just great. You know, he'd share that he played soccer. Now, he was still very efficient.
Mm.
But the guy I came to first here in Roseville area, California, he was a great dentist, but he would try to do the conversation thing. But then when you go try to go back and forth, he'd cut it off. So it's just like, oh, he didn't care about me. I'm not, I'm not doing this. He's a poser. Great dentist. You don't want to be that way as a leader, right?
No, no. And
Uh,
again, it's kind of like the microcosm of sales we mentioned at the beginning. A good salesperson has really good notes. Hey, David,
Exactly.
so you bought the yacht after all, right? So you'll need that extra finance package I mentioned.
Well, yeah, and you think about it, even if you got a team of 4,
Yeah.
do you have all their birthdays memorized? Do you remember all their spouses' names, their kids' names, if they're bringing them up? You're
Mm,
not a detective, interrogating them. So the prep piece I think is really important. Doesn't always require 15 minutes, particularly if you're on a roll and you're keeping it
mm,
consistent. Okay. And if it's shared notes, you're checking on the notes so you know how they're doing.
yeah.
So now I want to walk through your system, your acronym, but I want to go much slower. So you go ahead, start with the first one, and then I want to peel back the onion. What was
All
the
right.
first one again?
It was C. CUFCP starts with C, which is check-in.
Check in.
That's
Yeah.
it. U is for update.
Okay. So you're going to check in, and as we just discussed, there's power, which you had already mentioned. There's power when you're following up on something from the prior week.
Yeah.
So as part of your prep, if I'm understanding you correctly, I'm going to look at the prior week's notes, or maybe
Yeah.
even farther back. So I'm ready for the check-in. Once again, I'm not going to interrogate them, but I might bring up 1 or 2 things because it communicates what?
Yeah. It shows that you care. It shows
Exactly.
you care about them, about their business, about their activity, that what they do is important and what they haven't done is equally important because you said you would, but
That's right.
and so
And
it's
one
there.
one thing I'll add to that is a consideration that I'm sure you coach. You may have also seen that survey that was done years ago where 50%, 57% of our communication is body language,
Mm,
and 35%, 58%, 35%, I think that's it, approximately, is tone of voice. Only
mm,
7% is the words. So I want to challenge the leaders out there. If they're going to do your check in, okay, if I say, yeah, 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 well, you said your son was doing something, in soccer last week. How was that? How's that going? That's quite different from, hey, man, your son was doing something great in soccer last week. It sounded like that was a lot of fun. Is that still going on well?
hmm.
Two totally different body language, tone of voice. So the
Totally.
check-in isn't just checking the box you did the check-in. And your body language is, I want to rush. I want to move past this. I really don't care.
Yeah.
Have you had clients where you've had to work with them on that?
It's well, you
You got a good
start with
story? No
ah,
names. No names. But
there is no background. Well, it starts, you've got to start back with the self. So, I mean, I break it down
good
into two
point.
bits. I start with the managing self before you get allowed to manage others. And if you can't look at yourself in a mirror and you don't recognize that it is not about you, life is not about you. Life is about the journey you go on and the journey you take on with other people. You're a character in the story. And if you don't get that, you won't get this. So we get to, when I do the program, we get to the one-to-one piece after we've done communication and listening and delegation and all the other good stuff. We get to
Yeah.
the one-to-one bit once you've actually had this other stuff beaten into you over the course of the 9 weeks, right? But I think the challenge is when people don't understand that the job of manager is not about you being the most important person. You're at the top of the hierarchy, the top of the pyramid, but in reality, you're at the bottom, holding up everything else. You're there supporting, serving everybody else. You're in service of. And I think what you find is when when people forget that and they put themselves first, they rapidly end up being in a team of one. And a leader with no followers is just a guy going for a walk.
Well, it's interesting if we go back, and I'm not saying it in a spiritual sense here for those who are uncomfortable with spiritual stuff, But if you look at this leadership principle of Jesus, two things. First of all, when he only gave one commandment,
Mm.
and he said, I only got one commandment, new commandment to give you, love one another as I've loved you, love one another. By this, men will know you're my disciples if you love one another. He's talking to his best audience and he has to repeat himself 3 times. Okay.
Uh,
So, and the other
they're
thing
not the
is,
brightest guys. I see. I mean,
yeah,
really, the more you read it, you're thinking, guys told you this stuff like 4 times now already.
yeah, yeah. And I've modeled it. Okay.
Yeah.
But when you think about that, it goes back to Paul, like so much of what you're saying in your system is that if people feel you, where you use the word love, but you also use the word a lot, value.
Mm.
Love communicates value, appropriate love communicates value. Man, they stick with you through thick and thin. You want them
Uh-huh.
to work late one night, they're like, yeah, I'll make it work, or I'll make
Yeah.
this happen. They're committed because they feel part of a team, a tribe. They really want to make it happen because they know you care,
Yeah.
right? Yeah. And then the second thing is, of course, the classic, one of the best, most memorable moments that Jesus did with his disciples is he washed their feet before the Last Supper.
He
And that,
knew that morning was his last day on earth. What would you do? You go out and you go to Disneyland and have a big steak, or would you wash the feet of the people that you served?
yeah,
Right. That's a
yeah, amazing,
thing.
amazing. So sorry, I really made something big of the check-in, but the check-in is important, and it's been, but to be candid, Paul, it was difficult for me to learn how to do a check-in as a high D. I was just ready to let's dive into business. I still have to force myself. So let's go to the second step that you've got, which I could
Mm.
say several of them, but I want you to do the intro and then I want to peel back the onion.
So the second is the update. And the update, I think, is a project update. It's what's going on, an update. And it's quite difficult, especially if you deal with numbers. Let's say you're a sales guy or marketing or whatever it is you're dealing with, not to jump into that because that's not what this is about. Your one-to-one is not, it's not your pipeline call. It's not a sales call. It's not a marketing review. It is a personal conversation with your boss. It's a strategic meeting with your boss, with your colleague. And you should have a separate conversation for that aspect of your business. This is my time. What are you doing to develop your skills? What projects are you working on? What are the things that are important to you? Tell me about that. Where are we? Because you said you'd be done by Wednesday and it's Thursday already, or whatever the issue is. We can get these things moving forward. That's the update.
Yeah, I think that your update actually then is a kind of a tipping point to the accountability in the
Yep,
conversation, but you do it in
exactly
a
what it
very
is.
soft way. So I have a similar approach, but the focus is first there's some accountability. So we have certain metrics, or you promised you were going to do something by this meeting, or I promised I was going to do something by this meeting. And once again, what does that follow up or updates? Because you're organized, right? You prepared. What does that update communicate to the person when you're touching on those things in a respectful, empathetic,
Mm.
but with some firm boundaries way that's going to lead into these other portions?
It goes back and it respectfully reflects that I value what you're doing, that what you're doing is
Yeah.
important. And I haven't said, why are you not on track? What I've said is, and again, this is a technique, it's a learned skill. You want to hold somebody accountable, right? Dead easy. Are you on track? Yes. Bravo. Are you on track? No. Help me understand what, not why, what you need to get on track. How can I
Yeah.
help? Help
It
me
really,
understand.
you've alluded to not, I'm going to use different words. You've
Hmm.
alluded to not using these meetings to whack them.
No,
Okay. So,
you're
which is
sure as
really
heck holding
good.
them you're holding them accountable.
Yes.
Totally.
Yeah. And,
Yeah.
and I actually had an epiphany a few years back with the good cop, bad cop negotiation style.
Mm,
And I have what I call good cop leadership style.
mm,
So you're always the good cop as the leader. You're
yeah.
always, to use your term, loving, valuing them. You're coming alongside. But hey, these boundaries, they're typically not people, are the bad cop. We have a metric we're supposed to meet. We have a deadline we're supposed to meet. We have a quality standard we're supposed to meet. Man, but as the good cop, like you're saying, I love what you're doing here with this format, with the system, is you're then coming alongside and say, oh, what happened here? How can you do this? But it's firm. You're help guiding them, directing them in a positive direction. So the update then keys into, was it the next two steps that you have? It almost sounds
Yeah.
like it kind of tees it up.
It's a magic trick. It totally does. Yeah. So you check in. How's you doing? You have your update. Are you on track for what you said? If not, how can I help you get back on track? What do you need? Okay. So CUF is the next one, which is feedback. Okay. So the feedback is, this is behavior I've observed. That could be negative feedback, or rather, let's say constructive, positive, moving forward feedback, right? This is behavior I've observed. This was the impact of the observed behavior. Again, it has to stand up in court. You can't deny it, right? No, it's not. Well, then it's not clear enough. Help me understand. That's it. And in the process of you helping me understand, you will probably, or you should help yourself understand, because most coaching is awareness. So this is what I observed. And there was a guy who actually said, a wonderful guy called Tom Willis, a company called Phoenix Performance. And he said, there was some research they did where people hear the word feedback, and it's equivalent to hearing footsteps behind you in a dark night, right? It's
Ooh.
terrifying. It's unpleasant. You don't like it. So just change the word. I've got some feedback I've got an observation for you, right? Maybe we should change it from feedback to observation. But it's an observation of what I have observed. It's my observation that you cannot argue with. And then the impact of what I've observed, because you're probably unaware that your behavior or what you've done or not done has an impact. And then you say, help me understand. And then most importantly, you sit down with your mouth shut. Stop talking and let them fill the blank.
It's interesting because I believe that what you're describing actually plays really well with the good cop leadership thing.
Mm.
I'll send that to you to
I'd
consider,
love to see it.
because it's doing what you are recommending,
Mm.
but instead of, it's staying more on the, even almost transferring from here's what I observed feedback to more like, well, do you realize when you did this, Sally took offense at that because this is the way she received it. And I'm not blaming Sally, and I'm not blaming you, but this didn't seem like it's working. The bad cop is it's not working.
Mm. Yeah.
And so what do you think we should do about that? And one thing, sorry, I always laugh at myself because at 67, I'm still learning and I love learning, but only in the last year, my wife, who's just a gem, I'm so thankful for Kelly, but she's taught me that, when I'm dealing with my 15-and-a-half-year-old daughter, or some of the other kids, you kind of do the feedback thing, you kind of help them understand certain things, but then there has to be a decision made. And she says, you really have to give them an option. And I think this was taught also by Danny Silk, but we say, okay, well, we need to do something about this. Do you want to come home at 8:30 tonight, or do you want to come home at 9? Or do you want to take out the garbage as your chore, or do you want to go weed for a half an hour? Or so you give them two, because you have to bring it to a head. But if you just say, boom, you're going to go do this, they may not like that. So you give them two options. If they suggest a third, you can consider it. But at least you're driving to a conclusion versus another argument or
Yeah.
debate. You're just like, boom. So anyway, adult daycare. So sorry.
You're narrowing things. You're pointing. But I think that's slightly, I mean, the nuance I think there is you're trying to get people to own, to be responsible
Yes.
for what they need to do. Because if you go and say, go weed the garden,
Yeah.
okay, I'll go and weed the garden, but it's going to be a half-assed job, and that's it. It's the last time you ever asked me, right? You got to try and get that intrinsic motivation. And I think part of the job is to try and open their jaws, shove your hand down their throat, rummage around in there, and try and pull out the stuff that they're good at, the strengths, the stuff that they really want to do, and put that in front of them in a way
Oh,
that drives them.
I'm so glad you brought that up again because my tiny brain forgot it. But I know you alluded to not whacking them, which I started to go down, then I got distracted. But I know what you're also saying is that part of this meeting, because you've alluded to it, but haven't said it in the direct way that I'm proposing, is part of the objective in the meeting is, okay, where can I build this person up in this meeting? So in other words, where can I emphasize something they did well, or where can I emphasize a strength and help them make it into a superpower? Am I hearing you right?
Yeah. I mean, that's again, as it happens, I think it's session 5, which is managing from strengths. You know, you go and you build people's strengths up rather than focus on their weaknesses. If I say,
Yeah.
David, let's work on the stuff you're really good at and that therefore you really like, you're going to say,
Yeah.
yay. If I
Yeah.
say, David, we're going to work on your, I don't know, financial planning and accountancy skills, you're going to go, okay, I suppose, boss, and you're going to put no effort into it, and you're maybe going to get from a 3 out of 10 to a 4 out of 10. But I want to take you from a 7 out of 10 to a 9 out of 10, because don't you want a room full of 9s and 10s? Of course you do.
Well, of course. And then you've got people who've mastered something and they're
Mhm.
incredible superstars. And you find somebody else to do the stuff they don't do well. I mean, you can
Heartbeat.
look at any sport, and most of the top performers are phenomenal in their primary responsibilities.
Narrow areas. In your
Yeah,
football team, you've got narrow, you do the quarterback, for example, doesn't do
yeah,
the other bit.
yeah. Well, and you look at British or international football, FUTBOL, and you got a forward who knows how to score goals. Well, he's probably not the best goalie. All right.
No.
I mean, it's not going to. That's
But
not
a
where
bit
you're
of a
going to swap the
class.
roles. So
Exactly, exactly. Oh, you're totally right.
okay.
This is yeah, on the money. Okay.
All right. So Paul,
Cool.
I'm having too much fun, and but I look at the clock, and we've got to wrap up for your sake. But you've also got a book out, Hidden Tradecraft of Elite Managers. I don't know whether you want to close by talking about the book or how will you want to close this out? Because I love talking with you. I feel we could go for another hour easy.
Easy. Well, the book is essentially the book of the course, right? So I won't dance around and say that it's anything other than me reading out and talking through and then writing out all the stories and all the bits and pieces of learning and research and experience and pain that I gathered over the last however many years. And I spent the best part, about 3 years building this out. So I put it into a book, and the book's coming out in November. But it's the book of the course, and it'll be available on the website eventually in due course. So Hidden Tradecraft of Elite Managers, 18 sections, all about managing self, all about managing others. But the pinnacle of it is this CUFCP, which is the idea that you have one moment, and it's the way that you pull everything together. And lo and behold, on the website, you can find a free download of that chapter, that section on how you transform your one-to-ones. And there's templates and all sorts of stuff in there as well. All sorts of nice freebies. I'm sure we can put a
Well,
link in the description or something.
I love it. I would add one of probably many analogies, but those one-on-ones, the way you've structured them is like the fuel stop,
Yeah.
and your team members need that fuel to keep going, and they need the reinforcement that, hey, I value you, I'm here for you, I've got your back. So Paul, I want to thank you so much for being on the show. I think this has been a great conversation, and I look forward to connecting with you at other times. So wish you the best.
Thank you, David. It's been an absolute pleasure.